The Occupy Wall Street movement launched in Lower Manhattan between the towering pillars of financial power and some would say greed is growing. What began with protesters camping out here in New York is now inspiring copycat protests in Boston, Los Angeles, Chicago and beyond. An hour ago, a coordinated walkout was planned at college campuses from coast to coast. And at this very moment, protesters gather here downtown to rally before a new march an hour from now and perhaps new arrests as they restate their case. The backdrop, of course, a political discussion over class warfare and who's at fault for such unequal wealth. Presidential candidate Herman Cain, suddenly surging in the Republican field, said today he thinks Occupy Wall Street is one big smokescreen from the left.
I don't have facts to back this up, but I happen to believe that these demonstrations are planned and orchestrated to distract from the failed policies of the Obama administration. Don't blame Wall Street. Don't blame the big banks. If you don't have a job and you're not rich, blame yourself.
Compassionate conservatism his is apparently not. And meanwhile, severe income and disparity and crippling unemployment. So, is the anger of this self-described 99% understandable, Mr. Bernanke?
They blame, with some justification, the problems in the financial sector for getting us into this mess. And they're dissatisfied with the policy response here in Washington. And at some level, I can't blame them. Certainly, 9% unemployment and very slow growth is not a very good situation.
Not a very good situation at all, Mr. Bernanke, and a crisis no doubt driven by the deliberate sale of derivatives based upon the bundling of worthless mortgages, a reckless cash grab that fueled the crash of 2008. Don't forget, bonus season is once again just around the corner. Our next guest is a best-selling author who's chronicled the perilous economy here and around the world. In his most recent book, Boomerang, Travels in the New Third World. And I'm delighted to say that Michael Lewis joins us now. Good afternoon, Mike.
Good to be here.
We'll get to the protests in a minute, but you went as far afield as Greece, as Iceland. You examined the American situation, of course. What did this tour of financial devastation tell you?
The first thing is, and it's what interested me in doing this in the first place, because it was a pain in the neck to do.
I bet.
What interested me was we had this event. Everybody experienced the same event, and it was banks disguising risk and making loans they should have never made to people all over the developed world, and they presented the world with temptation. It's like being locked in a dark room with a pile of money. What do you want to do with it? And every country got asked this question, and everybody responded in a slightly different way, in some ways dramatically different way. And I thought you can use money as a window into the culture, into culture. That it's a way of looking at these societies, including our own.
I was going to say, the financial meltdown, according to you, was caused by easy money, greed, and even outright fraud. You seem to be suggesting that this was less institutional failure and more a moral failing by individual people.
Both. I think in a properly functioning financial market, the banks have to act as brakes.
With regulations.
Yes. The government puts brakes on the banks, but the banks put the brake on the lending. In the relationship between borrower and lender, if lender is not the brake, the borrower will abuse the situation. And the banks did not do their job. There was clearly institutional failure, but underneath the institutional failure was, no question about it, moral failure. But the moral failure was a response to screwed up incentives, basically, and inside the financial system. And people were paid to make lots of bad loans.
And therefore, there was this perverse incentive which encouraged people to commit fraud, to hide certain deals, because the profitability of transacting the deal was huge.
Yes, and I think you put it another way, that the people whose job it was to evaluate and price risk in the financial world were paid to disguise risk. And you see this in the subprime mortgage market, but you see this in this book. I mean, Greece, to get into the euro, has to rig its books, and Goldman Sachs helps the Greek government rig its books. Ireland has these banks that are going insane. A Merrill Lynch analyst in London writes a scathing report about these Irish banks, and is bowdlerized by Merrill Lynch.
And yet, in every single presidential debate that we've had with the Republicans, every single one of them has said the problem is government intervention and regulations. What we need to do is pare back the regulations. But you and I know that without those regulations, look at what happened in 2008.
You know, that it's insane to say that it was that all this was a result of government regulations. It's true. It is true to say that in the U.S. mortgage market, the government didn't help matters. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac didn't help matters, but the private sector was the core of the problem, and it being aspects of the private sector being unregulated. And the problem we have now is that you've got these banks now. They've been subsidized back, gifted back into existence. They'd all be, if you wanted to live by the law of the jungle, all these places would be bankrupt. They'd be out of business. The government saved them. And yet, what do they do once they're rescued? They insert themselves into the reform debate and squelch reform.
Absolutely. And what we're seeing in Manhattan and around the country today with these protests are people saying what? Saying that they're sick and tired of what happened?
You know what I think it is? I think it's the same thing that gave rise to the Tea Party. I think there is a sense of unfairness in the system. And it's true that it's unfair. I mean, that's why these things have legs. You can't have capitalism for everybody except the capitalists. You know, the capitalists get socialism. They get to keep the upside of what they do. And if they screw it up, we all have to bail them out. That single act of unfairness, I think, has sparked moral outrage.
Why has it taken 3 years for people to feel that deeply enough to walk out on the streets?
Because it's taken 3 years of high unemployment and pain, and people needed to feel the pain before they were willing to respond politically. I think that's what's happening. Young people thought, well, I'll hold my breath and this will pass, and now they see it's not passing and they're angry, and that anger is going to find political expression.
You talk about political expression. We're in the middle of this campaign now, let's be frank, for the 2012 presidential election. Rick Perry has announced that he's made 17 million or attracted donations worth 17 million. Do you think that money in the political process has corrupted the very process?
Of course. I mean, that's just obvious. The question is what you can do.
Well, you say it's obvious, but none of these candidates say that. They welcome the money as it flows in.
No, it's horribly warping. You saw it in the debate over financial reform, that the Republican Party, which had been quite hostile to Wall Street very early on, caved. They saw that there was an opportunity to get the Wall Street dollars away from the Democrats, and they did everything they could to prevent reform. No, it's absolutely corrupting. And these people who are marching on Wall Street, I think they ought to do two things. I think they ought to say, we're going to make lists of candidates who are taking money from Wall Street interests, and we're going to do what we can to get them defeated. You need to know who's taking money from these interests. The other thing I think they should say is it would be interesting if they said, we're going to treat them like tobacco companies or like South African companies during apartheid. Investment in these companies should be unacceptable. So if you're on a college campus, ask if your endowment owns stock in Goldman Sachs, you know, and if you disapprove of that, let it be known. I think that this movement could actually have some effect.
You seem to be saying that we've lost complete faith in government to do anything about these huge banks, and it's got to come from the grassroots.
Yes.
It's got to come from the people.
Well, because it started with people, so yes.
Michael Lewis, thanks again, and congratulations on the big screen success of your best-selling baseball book, Moneyball.
Thanks.
You're too successful.